Hi, everyone. Good Tuesday afternoon and welcome to GoLocal Live. I'm GoLocal News editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for tuning in for the latest in national politics with Jennifer Lawless at the University of Virginia. Jennifer, thank you for joining us.
Happy to join you.
Great day to be joining us. 2 articles of impeachment, abuse of power, and obstruction to Congress. What was your reaction when you heard just 2 articles?
I wasn't surprised. After we saw the hearings yesterday, the speculation was basically that there were these 2 articles and that the way that the Democrats laid out their case suggested that there would be just these 2 articles. And the logic behind it makes some sense, right? It allows Democrats in vulnerable districts not to have to cast a really wide net. The narrower the scope, the easier it is for them to defend a vote for impeachment. But the alternative would be to actually have many more articles, allow them to vote no on some of them, and still vote yes on the ones where they believe that their constituents would let them off the hook. And I think that that would have demonstrated, at least in a lot of these Trump districts that Democrats hold, that they're not necessarily just doing the party's bidding. But that was not the strategy that the leadership decided to pursue.
Let's talk a little bit about time frame speculation of a House vote before Christmas.
It looks like it's going to happen. I mean, the Judiciary Committee is likely going to vote on these articles on Thursday. And then it's likely that it'll go to the full floor next week and early the week after. So I do believe this will be Donald Trump's Christmas present, maybe the worst Christmas present a president can get. But, you know, that moves it into the Senate for the early part of next year.
And then let's talk about time frame on the Senate side. Of course, speculation right now, the Republican-controlled Senate will not impeach the president. What would that time frame look like?
So it depends. According to Mitch McConnell, he wants to get this done quickly. He's even thinking about a 10 or 12 or 14-day trial where there's a limited amount of time that both sides have, and then there's a vote. The president and the White House would prefer a much longer timeline because, which might seem ironic at the beginning when you think about it, but it would actually allow this circus to basically be a way that the Republicans caricature and characterize the Democrats moving into the election. The longer the trial goes on, also, the more it makes the Democratic primaries complicated for several of the frontrunners. So, I think it depends. Now, the irony in wanting to drag it out, of course, for Donald Trump is that it would take Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders off the campaign trail, which gives Joe Biden quite an advantage. And the entire reason he's being impeached is because of his concerns about Joe Biden. So I think there's a little bit of an inconsistency there in terms of the president's logic, but I'm not one to judge.
Helping Joe, if, as you said, with Sanders and Warren off the trail. Let's talk a little bit about the Democratic 2020 primary field in recent days, what we've seen. Let's talk about Joe being Joe, kind of yelling at people who are asking him questions, yelling at reporters. But as you said, he has gaffes occasionally. He has sort of missteps. But is it just Joe being Joe?
I think it is, and I think he can do this occasionally, and when there really seems to be some sort of justification behind it. There's no question that it's authentic, right? Like, this is the way he actually feels like responding. The problem is that you need to know that you're electing somebody who is not always going to respond the way that he or she might want to respond. We've seen that in the White House. It's not very effective. So, I don't think that this can become the overall temperament on the campaign trail, but I think it has a lot of Biden's supporters pretty excited because it demonstrates a level of vigor and enthusiasm that he has running right now that I think a lot of people hadn't seen up until this point. Now, it also doesn't seem to be hurting him that much. I mean, the latest poll that came out today has him back at 29%, which is basically the highest he's been since June. So he now has a double-digit lead over all of the other contenders, which is pretty firm footing, given that we've been at this for quite some time.
Now, you mentioned, of course, him saying what he wants to say, that being Joe Biden. And, of course, we have a president who likes to say what he likes to say as well. But does it hurt a Joe more if he's not, again, that cult of personality that has the strong, staunch following that the president has? Of course, you just mentioned Joe being in a very comfortable lead. But does he have to be precarious, again, when he is not necessarily that cult of personality that is fully embraced by the party?
Yeah, I mean, he's not going to win the election based on a cult of personality, but I do think that whoever the Democratic nominee is going to bring with him or her a large support base, probably more than we saw in 2016, because we now know that Donald Trump's presidency has yielded a lot of unfavorable outcomes for Democrats. And so, I don't think that there's going to be an enthusiasm problem on the side of the Democrats, regardless of who the nominee is. The one other thing I would note about Joe Biden is that at this point, he has demonstrated, through these incidents, though, that he's able to respond off the cuff in a way where he's actually a bit more articulate than he's been on the debate stage. So, there are pluses and minuses associated with this kind of behavior, but I certainly don't think that it's a net loss.
Let's talk, as you mentioned, again, the two senators getting pulled off when it heads to the Senate. Bernie Sanders picking up an endorsement, the Center for Popular Democracy Action. I mean, it is hand-to-hand combat between him and Warren still to get that progressive endorsement from any number of groups. I mean, how important is this when we see these endorsements coming out as they really weigh in on sort of a Warren v. Sanders who are just jockeying for an advantage?
Well, I think it demonstrates that Bernie Sanders has no incentive to go away anytime soon. It was close, right? And Castro was also vying for their endorsement. The three of them fared quite well. It had to go to a second vote. But you've got dozens of these progressive organizations that are saying at this point, they're putting their mouths and their feet behind Sanders. That's very helpful for Sanders, but it's probably more of a blow to Warren than anything else, because if she had any intention of sort of making herself the obvious progressive candidate who would be running against either Biden or Buttigieg as the obvious moderate candidate, although I think both of those labels are a problem, this kind of endorsement demonstrates that that's not where the activists necessarily see that race. And it's important to keep in mind that in the primary, it's the activists and it's the true believers who are far more inclined to turn out. So it was excellent news for Bernie Sanders. And the other thing that's kind of interesting is that Elizabeth Warren has been spending a lot of her time going head to head with Pete Buttigieg lately, not with Sanders. So we'll see what happens in next week's debate. But at this point, I think the Warren campaign is trying to reset and figure out how it wants to move forward and spend these final weeks heading into Iowa and New Hampshire.
So when you mentioned Warren squaring off against Mayor Pete, do you think that she's acquiesced the progressive backing, if you will, and might be tacking sort of to the center where she's not to be? Could it be a shift in her campaign as they see where the opening might lie?
Well, I don't think that she's going to shift any of her core principles or beliefs, but I do think it's become clear that if the other candidates are trying to take her on, she's got to take them on too. She can't just sort of take on billionaires and explain that she's going to be a different vision for the nation. People want to see how she can go head to head with the other people on the stage, because frankly, that's what she's going to have to do if she wins the nomination and goes up against Donald Trump. So I think that's part of it. The other thing that's kind of interesting here is that a lot of these polls indicate that people's second choice is not who you would expect. So if she's able to get Mayor Pete out of this race or, to fall in the polls, it's not like all of those supporters necessarily go to Biden. She could pick up a fair share of those voters. So I think there's probably some strategic decision making on the part of the Warren campaign also about where the lowest hanging fruit is. And in this latest national poll, in fact, both Buttigieg and Warren's numbers are down, but Buttigieg has taken a bigger hit.
Now, a recent poll that just came out yesterday, I believe, the Harris poll in conjunction with Harvard University, decided to toss out the name of Hillary Clinton to potential Democratic voters, and coming out ahead. Now, they had her at 21%, Biden at 20%, Sanders at 12%, Warren 9%, and then Bloomberg down the list. We were talking about this, the percentage chance that she could enter the race.
Minuscule. But the other thing I would remind people of is that Hillary Clinton is incredibly well-liked and popular when she's not running for office. So when she was running for the Senate in New York, she wasn't that popular. When she was an actual sitting senator, she was. When she ran for president in 2008, not at all popular. As Secretary of State, she very much was. 2016, highest unlikables and lowest favorability of Democratic presidential candidates in a long time. Post 2016, everyone loves her.
Well,
So,
the Howard,
you know, I
this
think
is the Howard Stern bump.
I'm sorry?
It's the Howard Stern bump, I think. I mean,
It is. I think it's generally that people like her when she's not worried about cultivating their votes, and they don't love the persona that she evokes when she is. So my sense is that if she actually entered that race, her standing would change pretty quickly. Hypothetically, sure, she's the front runner.
Very interesting vantage point there about, again, the former presidential candidate. Lastly, let's talk about the state of the U.S. economy. Good jobs numbers last week being up and unemployment being at a record 50-year low. Now, let's talk a little bit about this. If it's the economy, all of this, obviously, attention being paid to Capitol Hill right now. But as we move towards 2020, and if the economy continues to be strong, how do the Democrats respond?
So, right, James Carville famously said it's the economy stupid, and since then it has been, right? We know generally that when the economy is doing well, incumbent presidents tend to be rewarded, and when it's not, they tend to get booted to the curb. It's not a sure thing, though. And as far as Donald Trump is concerned, in order to get reelected, he needs this strong economy because his approval ratings are barely enough to generate reelection. If the economy moves in the other direction, if it goes down, it's hard to imagine any scenario by which he would be able to maintain the level of support he needs. So I think we're at a time right now where a strong economy, basically for Donald Trump, doesn't provide a lot of help, but it doesn't really hurt him. A weakening economy could be really, really destructive to his reelection chances.
Okay, well, all eyes on D.C., and of course, we'll hopefully have the opportunity to catch up with you next week. But in the meantime, what else are we keeping an eye on?
Well, Thursday is the deadline for who qualifies for the Democratic debate, which will be held the following week. Andrew Yang just qualified. He's the 7th candidate. So we are going to have at least 7 people on the stage, which, although a little bit more easy to manage than the 10 or the 11 that we've been seeing, 7 is still an awful lot, and it means that each candidate doesn't have that much time to speak. And the other thing to keep in mind, obviously, is what happens on Thursday in the House Judiciary Committee. And we'll start, I think, to get a sense of how the House vote will fall out as well.
Well, Jennifer Lawless down at the University of Virginia, as always, we appreciate your taking the time to Skype in with us here in Providence.
Have a good week.
Okay, you too. We're going to let Jennifer Lawless go, and we're going to let you go as well. Be sure to tune into GoLocal Prov throughout the evening and more for weather updates as we're looking at some winter weather coming in tomorrow on Wednesday here in Rhode Island. But in the meantime, find us on GoLocalProv.com. Keep following us on Facebook, and we'll see you back live in very short order. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel.